Honestly, this was a little bit upsetting because it was just some hating ass shit. On this friend group's vacation, there's only one couple. They're all camping out in the woods, so there's not really going to be opportunities for alone time. And I think most people would agree that getting it in on vacation just hits differently. No pun intended, but miraculously, an opportunity does present itself when everyone else wants to take the boat out on the lake and do some wakeboarding. The couple stays back, sneaks off into a tent, and then gets rudely interrupted by an entitled brat with her daddy's hunting rifle. Did they even make it past foreplay? Going into the afterlife with blue balls sounds hella tragic. I'm Brandon O. This is Terrorific, and we're chopping up 2023's VHS 85. Welcome back to the place where it's perpetually spooky season. Big news recently with this year's Oscar nominations being announced, and a horror film, shockingly, becomes the most nominated film of all time. I'm talking about Sinners, of course, with its 16 nominations received. Also recognized were Weapons, Frankenstein, The Ugly Stepsister, and Begonia. So the golden age of horror continues. I don't think I ever posted my top 2025 horror films on social media or anything, but Sinners was not my favorite. I wasn't one of the ones who thought it was the most incredible film ever. I thought it was a great movie, but I think its strengths lied outside of the horror genre. It wasn't really a great horror movie, in my opinion. The vampire aspect really took a back seat to the cultural aspect of it, and that's fine. You know, I definitely think it deserves to be nominated for the things it was nominated for, but I just wasn't really feeling it from a horror perspective. So my number one movie of last year was Bring Her Back. Number 2, I had The Monkey. Number 3, I had The Ugly Stepsister. Number 4, Weapons. Number 5, Sinners. And honorable mention was Clown in a Cornfield. So I do want to rewatch Sinners at some point later on. I'm trying to give it some time to breathe to see if I can gain a newfound appreciation for it, but from a horror perspective, again, it just wasn't really doing it for me. And call me a cynic, but I have very low expectations for Sinners when it comes to how many awards it's actually going to win. 16 nominations is great. It's incredible, the most of all time, literally. However, there's like this feeling that this just seems like lip service. Not only because it's a horror film, and after last year's, noise about the substance being robbed and Demi Moore being robbed, I think people were really clamoring for horror films to be taken more seriously. And here comes Sinners, which, is a cultural mover, and it's a ripe opportunity to kind of, appease people, if you will. But not only is it a horror film, but it's also a black film. And, that also is working against it. Black films, I don't think, are traditionally recognized as being great films by these people during award seasons, which, we don't really need to dive into those reasons there. But, I think you can kind of pick up what I'm putting down. Because even when these black films and black filmmakers win the big awards, the best pictures, the best directors, whatever it may be, it's a certain type of film that is winning these awards. Like Moonlight won Best Picture in 2017, and it mainly depicted black people in a state of poverty and selling drugs, things that are stereotypically associated with black people. And then 12 Years a Slave won Best Picture in 2014, also becoming the first film to win Best Picture that had a black director. And it depicted people as slaves. So, with Sinners depicting black people from a position of power, fighting back against the establishment, of these white invaders of their space, I just have trouble believing that it's going to walk away with any of the major hardware, but I hope I'm wrong. We'll see. But now let's get to the reason why you're really here. We have gone through 5 films in the VHS franchise so far, 25 segments in total, ranking all of them on 4 criteria: story quality, special effects quality, situational fear, and likelihood of death, averaging those 4 ratings together to come up with one overall score and ranking the best segments in the entire franchise. But having a best means there must also be a worst. So our bottom 3 as they currently stand, we have Tape 56 from VHS with an overall score of 2.38. Then we have Slumber Party Alien Abduction from VHS 2 with an overall score of 2.13. And at the bottom, we have Vicious Circles from VHS Viral with a score of 2.0. I should have these scores memorized by now. I mean, they've been at the bottom for what, like 3 films now, but I still have to pull up my spreadsheet to rattle off those numbers. Our current top 5 consists of number 5, Ozzy's Dungeon from VHS 99 with a score of 4.13. At number 4, Amateur Night from VHS, also with a score of 4.13, but it has the tiebreaker advantage on special effects quality over Ozzy's Dungeon. At number 3, we have The Sick Thing That Happened to Emily When She Was Younger from VHS with a score of 4.25. At number 2, Safe Haven from VHS 2 with a score of 4.75. And at number 1, our top dog, The Subject from VHS 94 with a score of 4.88. VHS 85 has 5 new segments, so let's see if that shakes up our leaderboard. So kicking us off at number 5, we have TKNOGD. TKNOGD was directed by Natasha Kermani and written by Zoe Cooper, and they came up with the story together as well. Kermani's filmography includes 2020's Lucky and 2025's Abraham's Boys. Cooper was also a staff writer on Peacock's now canceled horror show Teacup, as well as co-writing my top-ranked segment from VHS 99, Ozzy's Dungeon. TKNOGD's story centers on a performance artist named Ada Lovelace, who is in a small theater putting on her one-woman show. Now, the real Ada Lovelace was a 19th century British mathematician, primarily known for her work on the analytical engine, which was a proposed mechanical computer designed by fellow British mathematician Charles Babbage. Lovelace is credited with being first to recognize the machine's potential beyond just calculations, and as a result is often considered the world's first computer programmer. Ada kicks off her show by asking the audience who here believes in God. And she goes on to say that we have killed God and created a new one in its place, the God of technology. She then plays a video on the stage of a guy talking about some hot new tech that he's created. Starting with the Techno Gloves, which are a set of gloves that let one touch or interact with something in the digital world, essentially allowing someone to exist in 2 planes at once. And these Techno Gloves pair with another accessory called iPhones, which are a visor that allows one to see into the digital world. iPhones as in EYE, but real subtle with that name. And this dude, who may or may not be Steve Jobs, also believes that the future lies in wearing robotic clothing and transporting oneself to the digital reality. And he's probably not wrong. So Ada puts on a suit with Techno Gloves and iPhones, and she also has a screen on stage that allows the audience to see the digital world that she is also seeing. She begins making vocalizations and incantations to summon the tech god, and she goads it with doubts of its existence, calls it a myth. She is challenging it to awaken and show itself. And she promptly fucks around and finds out, because the tech god shows up in the digital realm and is displeased, because understandably so, because who the fuck is this random person coming in here talking all this cash shit? But to her credit, Ada quickly realizes that something here is off, because the techno god does not have a humanoid appearance. I think that she assumed, and I know I definitely assumed, that it would look humanoid, because if God supposedly created us in his image, if we were to create a god of technology, one would think that we would also create this god in our image. But no, the techno god is monstrous looking, alien looking and looks very upset. So Ada tries to remove the iPhones, but the visor won't come free. The TKNOGD snatches up digital Ava and causes her to levitate in the real world as a result, and it absolutely begins to mop her up. It's like flinging her around the room, starts breaking bones, like snaps her leg, claws her leg up, which causes her leg to be skinned in the real world and tears off the other leg. At one point, Ada takes her glove off, the techno glove, and her hand is just not there. It's like she's began to fuse with this digital world. And eventually she succumbs to her injuries because, again, she had a leg completely torn off, you know, just spraying blood into the crowd. But they all think it's part of the show. So once she dies, they give her light applause. And the segment ends. So let's go to the ratings. For the story, I gave TKNOGD a rating of a 3. It was interesting, very interesting concept. I wish it would have just gone a little bit deeper because it does raise some interesting philosophical questions or discussion points. Like, technology is something that human beings have become overly reliant on. TKNOGD might be a little bit too nice of a descriptor. I think it's more of like a techno overseer or owner, because we are definitely slaves to technology. The shift in so many like societal norms and behaviors and attitudes that has arisen with, you know, in conjunction with social media and other forms of technology has just been absolutely insane. Like, beauty standards have been warped. The way that we get our news and our information, misinformation is so easy to spread and disseminate now. It's like technology, for all the good it does, you know, connecting all of us, you know, advances in medicine, transportation, education, whatever it may be, all those things have been great, yes, but the dark side of that is that despite having access to this information superhighway, I feel like people are dumber than we've ever been, and it starts so young. Like, I was at a bar last week watching the Bears and Rams game, and there was this kid who couldn't have been older than like 8. And I mean, we were there for like 3 hours or whatever it was, right? And the entire time he just has an iPad and headphones on while his parents are watching the game. And I'm not judging, you know, anyone's parenting style. Parenting is hard. You get it done however you can. But we also can acknowledge the negative impacts of technology on such a young person's brain. And like, my dad is a math teacher, and he's told me about how things have shifted in the classrooms where you used to teach actual arithmetic, teach actual calculations and, you know, mental math. But now it's more about teaching kids how to use the calculator to have them solve the problems for them. It's like, we are fucked. We are fucked. Again, like, call me cynical, but we are fucked. Like, technology, of course, has its uses, and I'm not saying that we should do without it. No one wants to go back to the Stone Age, but I wish there was a little bit more balance involved, or a little bit more emphasis on, you know, preserving some of the old ways, as well as, you know, understanding and realizing that technology is beneficial to us today. But I digress. Yeah, if TKNOGD had gone in, you know, a little bit more depth, especially with that first question, like, you know, who here believes in God? Like, I was expecting, you know, to use my brain a little bit more, but yeah, it just kind of quickly went into just dismemberment. But hey, maybe that's the point, you know? Maybe that's a commentary on how we aren't using our brains as much because we're so reliant on technology. So if that's the case, then hey, message received and respect. But still, I would have wanted to kind of think about this, or have this, you know, discussed a little bit more deeply. For special effects, I gave TKNOGD a 4. Whenever Ada tried to remove the techno glove in her hand, no longer existed in the real world. That was a pretty cool visual there. And they relied on practical effects for the most part. So, you know, she's levitating, and when she's getting picked up by the TKNOGD, And when her leg gets like skinned and shit, it's all just exposed meat. That looked pretty gnarly. And the leg being torn off. And finally, at the end of the segment, the cameraman, he goes to check on Ada after she's died. And when he flips up the visor on her iPhones, it reveals like her exposed eyeballs and brain. Like the whole front part of her face is just like gone. I don't know if it's like melted or, you know, like been transported to the real world. Like she's being downloaded. I mean, the digital world. Like she's being downloaded over there or whatever. But yeah, just seeing her exposed eyeballs still kind of twitching around, that looked pretty crazy. So yeah, pretty solid special effects. Situational fear, I went with a 3. For Ada, it was probably a 5, but the audience all thought it was part of the performance, so they were just chilling. So split the difference and we get that 3. And finally, for likelihood of death, I went with a 1 because all of this could have been avoided if Ada wasn't talking all that shit. Like, there was absolutely no reason to call out the TKNOGD for being a myth. Like, even if you don't believe in something or believe in this god specifically, if there's even an iota of a possibility that it's real, that you could actually be transported to this digital world and experience things in the real life as they occur to you in that digital world, then why even risk it, bro? Like, you could have just been like, hello, TKNOGD, are you here? Like, approach in a more polite manner or whatever. But just to come in and basically kick the fucking door down and be like, hey, yo, bitch, fake bitch, where you at? I mean, you can't really be surprised when you get fucked up. So, yeah. Not to mention the fact that during her performance, when she's setting this all up, she mentions that if humans were to create a god, then that god would be young and childlike. She says that. What do children do? They throw tantrums. So if you are calling a childlike, powerful entity a myth and talking mad shit, it's probably likely it's gonna throw a tantrum and fuck you up. That death was totally avoidable. So yeah, 1. Which brings the overall score for TKNOGD to a 2.75. At number 4, we have Total Copy, which is the frame narrative for VHS 85. We're back to that structure. Total Copy is shot as like a documentary, and it's been taped over in certain parts, and those certain parts that have been taped over are the other segments in the film. But Total Copy was directed by David Bruckner and written by Evan Dixon, and they also came up with the story together. Bruckner returns to the VHS franchise after about a decade. He was the director of Amateur Night from the very first VHS film. Total Copy centers on a team of scientists, Dr. Pike Spratling, Dr. Gary Newell, Dr. Margaret Porter, and Dr. Sarah Grayson, who are at a university studying an alien that they've named Rory. And they discovered Rory at the top of a butte. A butte is an isolated hill with steep, often vertical sides and a small, relatively flat top, typically found in arid or desert regions, particularly in the southwestern US and Mexico. And they are formed through the erosion of plateaus and mesas. The scientists stick Rory in a room with a television playing exercise videos, and again, I'm not here to judge anybody's parenting style, but this is how they decide to introduce it to humanity, and they discover that it can shapeshift. Rory then shapeshifts into a form that kind of resembles Gary, and at that point, Dr. Grayson calls an emergency meeting to address why this is problematic, despite Spratling's exuberance. And the other team members say Rory mimics what it sees. Duh. And Grayson is like, okay, that's cool, but Gary has never entered its chamber. So mimicking Gary means that it's been able to see through the one-way mirror this whole time and has been the one doing the observation. But Dr. Spratling thinks that it's a quote-unquote miracle and serves as proof of Rory's desire to communicate. okay, Dr. Dumbass. This fucking guy. Dr. Spratling thinks Rory is sick because apparently whatever his degree is in makes him qualified to diagnose alien illness. He's an expert in alien biology. And so literally everyone else thinks and tells him that he's being manipulated, but he doesn't buy it. At this point, Dr. Grayson is like, fuck all this shit, and she leaves the study and encourages folks to come with her, but no one else does. So congratulations to Dr. Grayson for being the smart doctor, while the other dumb doctors stay behind with King Dumb Doctor to see what unfolds with Rory. So they end up sending Gary into Rory's chamber to inject it with adrenaline to see if that helps with this phantom sickness. And once Gary's in there, which, why? Like, if I'm Gary, I'm being like, yo, Dr. Spratling, if you're the one who thinks that this motherfucker is sick, why don't you go give him the medicine? Since you want to play Dr. Daddy, like, you take care of that shit. But I guess Gary is more of a team player than I am. But he goes in there, and Rory releases like a horn tentacle, which they call a feeler, and this thing wraps around Gary's arm very tightly. And Gary is not very comfortable with this. He's trying not to freak out because it doesn't hurt yet, but it is incredibly tight. And the rest of the doctors, again, people who are supposed to be very smart, they break containment, which is rule number 1 of what to never do. But they break containment, go into the chamber to try to save Gary. And as they do so, another feeler is then wrapped around his leg so tightly that blood starts squirting and spurting from it. And eventually they accept and realize that they can't free Gary. And Spratling literally says, fuck it, let him go. Like, bruh, you're the one who did all this shit. And now you just want to say, fuck it? That is absolutely unhinged behavior. And Gary gets dragged back into the chamber and we hear bones cracking and R.I.P. Gary. Being named Gary in a VHS segment never ends well. And as they see Gary get compacted, they decide to run away, but these dummies leave the door to the chamber open as they do so. So once they reach the handprint reader at the exit, it won't scan Spratling's hand because it's covered in Gary's blood. So Rory comes up and throws those tentacles out, stabs folks, jabs folks, and kills everybody. And then eventually drags all their corpses back into its chamber where it has them reenacting the workout videos that's going on screen. So all these corpses are doing hip thrusts as this segment ends. And I guess if we're being real, I mean, Spratling's hypothesis, I guess, turned out to technically be correct. I mean, he thought that Rory was observing humanity's behaviors, and it was. I mean, its entire view of what humanity does or is was just limited to these workout videos. So as it sees these other humans behind their one-way mirror, in its mind, I guess it thought that, hey, y'all should be doing workout videos too. So if you're not going to, I will assist you with that. And yeah, unfortunately, maybe Spratling should have added a little bit more nuance into the equation. So let's go to the rating. Story-wise, I gave Total Copy a 3. This was probably the most cohesive frame narrative thus far in the VHS franchise. And it was interesting, you know, nothing really too original about it. It seemed inspired, at least in part, by The Thing. Instead of finding an alien life form in Antarctica, they found it in the desert. But still, there's tentacles involved and shape-shifting, etc. But yeah, I feel like in most of the other frame narratives, there were like awkward like time skips when the story would like jump forward. And this one had, like, you could tell it was moving forward, but it still seemed to stay like relatively like well paced. So I appreciated that. Special effects, I gave total copy a 3. The tentacles were like practically done, which was cool, but I wanted to see a little bit more like action, or see the tentacles in action, because whenever Rory like stabbed people or whatever, it usually like the impact or the penetration happened like just outside the camera frame. Like you didn't really see much more than like blood staining their clothes or whatever. And as far as the creature design goes for Rory, outside of the tentacles, it looked like CGI to me. Like there's moments when Rory's in the process of like shapeshifting and kind of taking on the form of Gary or whomever, and it looks like an imitation of something that's trying to be wet, where I think if it was like practically done, you could have really seen like that wet, gooey, like squelching kind of factor that it was seemingly trying to give off. For situational fear, I went with the rating of 4. I just felt like too many warning signs were being ignored for too long to be worthy of a 5. I think towards the end there, it definitely ratcheted up that level of fear, but still, I think in the back of their minds, like science was still like their main priority, especially for Spratling, trying to gather data and salvage the experiment. Once things finally became unsalvageable in his mind and he tried to escape, yeah, I'm sure they were terrified, but it just took too long to get there to justify a full 5. But personally, if I was confronted by a tentacled monster, I would definitely be shitting my pants. There is absolutely no way in hell I would ever volunteer or agree to walk into its containment chamber to to give it an adrenaline shot to make it feel better. Like, what the fuck is that? Hell no. And lastly, for likelihood of death, I went with the 2. Of course, everything could have been completely avoided if you would have left the alien where you found it, but I understand the need or compulsion to pursue this scientific endeavor, so fine, I'll raise your baseline up to a 2. But even at that point, like, breaking the containment on it, you know what I mean? Like, not closing the door after you realize that it's trying to murder people, and being unable to like get your hand clean in order to have the handprint scanner read it to get up out of there. Like, fumble after fumble after fumble. Most of that shit could have been avoided. So that brings the overall score for total copy to a 3.0. But before we break down the top 3 segments of VHS 85, I humbly request that if you have not yet done so, please subscribe and or follow the show on your platform of choice, as well as leave a rating. Preferably or ideally on Spotify or Apple, because those two seem to drive things more than others, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. But if you're rocking with the show, please help it continue to grow. These ratings and reviews really help push things with SEO and all that good shit, so thank you. Alright, so the third best segment in VHS 85 by my estimation is God of Death. God of Death was written and directed by Gigi Saul Guerrero, whose filmography also includes 2021's Bingo Hell, as well as Culture Shock, an episode from Blumhouse's 2019 TV series Into the Dark. And shout out to my homies over at Horror 365, because they recently sat down for a live interview with Gigi over on their YouTube channel. So go ahead and check that out. They do interviews with a variety of individuals in the horror community. They do live streams, movie reviews, topic discussions, and more. They celebrate 360 degrees of horror 365 days a year, because horror is not just a genre, it's a lifestyle. Their YouTube handle is at Horror365Alive, and you can also find them on all the socials, and those handles are at HorrorHeads365. But God of Death takes place in Mexico, opening up with a news crew getting ready for the morning show, and the main studio anchor named Lucia is a savage because she just starts roasting the evening crew. Apparently their main anchor has some stank ass breath because the microphone didn't smell the best. And honestly, like, bad breath is one of those things that is just like so irritating because it's so preventable. But it boggles my mind how many people are unaware of how badly their breath smells at times. Like, I had a homie in high school, right? He was like one of my good friends, and his breath every fucking day just smelled like shit, bro. And like, I tried to power through because I didn't want to be an asshole, but it reached a point where I was being an asshole by not saying anything. So I was like, dog, I gotta be upfront with you, bro. Like, your shit stinks, dog. He's like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, you can't taste that shit? It's in your mouth. Every single time you say something, you don't taste that sardine flavor in there. You know what I mean? Like, week old sardines, bro. Like, come on, dog. And so I had to start giving him like Listerine breath strips because I just could not take it. But as Lucia and field reporter Gabriella get ready to go on air, disaster strikes, and the story becomes a fictional depiction of the very real earthquake that struck Mexico City on September 19th, 1985. And I've mentioned in previous episodes that I enjoy having my expectations subverted, and that happens here because Lucia was definitely giving off main character energy. But as the earthquake hits, it causes the part of the ceiling from the studio to collapse, falling on Lucia, killing her. Pretty awkward. But our real main character, cameraman Luis, survives and gets saved by a rescue crew consisting of 4 people: Carla, Eddie, Miguel, and Javier. And they've got a tall task ahead of them because they're trying to get out of this building before it completely collapses, but they're up on one of the higher floors. And as they're trying to escape, Javier ends up being impaled by rebar after another series of tremors, or I guess aftershocks, causes the building to collapse even more. And bro, what happens next is an example of like super feminism. Like, I consider myself to be a feminist, but had I been in this situation, I probably would have like raised a question. So I guess I still have some room to grow, because of all the people in the group, they nominate Carla to take a crowbar to Javier's dome to end his pain and suffering. And she's like in shambles as she does this. Like, I don't know why someone else didn't step up and be like, all right, like, this is clearly very difficult for you. Like, why are we just gonna sit here and watch you do it? Like, someone else take that on. But hey, equality to the max. I respect it. And like I said, I guess I still have room to grow because technically there's no reason why Carla couldn't do it. But I don't know. It just seemed like a lot of toll was being taken on her that maybe someone else could have like chipped in. Like, maybe she does like one whack and then they just like pass it around. Like, everyone gets like one whack at the Javier pinata, you know what I mean? But the survivors soldier on, eventually coming to like a crawl space, and once they go through that, they end up in this room, this ominous looking room, and they hear even more ominous and strange screeching. And these motherfuckers are like, oh shit, we hear someone, let's go check it out. Bro, what kind of person screeches? But Luis is the only one who's like, nah, fuck that. I'm not going there. But everyone else wants to go, and obviously he's not going to stay by himself in the middle of this collapsing building, so he reluctantly follows along. And as they venture through the area, they walk through some mysterious billowing fog. So we have screeching and billowing fog, yet they still trudge on. But they end up in a room with like skulls on the walls and ancient Aztec sculptures. And someone recognizes one of the walls and calls it the Wall of Mictlan. In Aztec mythology, Mictlan is the underworld, and Mictlantecuhtli is the king of this underworld and the most prominent of several gods and goddesses of death. The worship of Mictlantecuhtli sometimes involved ritualistic cannibalism, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of where the story is about to go. The gang sees Eddie standing abnormally still in front of the Wall of Mictlan with his back to the camera. And they're like, yo, what the fuck are you doing, bro? And obviously, of course, he is now possessed. So he turns around and starts spouting some shit about their god rising from the underworld and how he'll feed and collect. He then takes a crowbar to his own belly and pulls out his guts. And then he swings the crowbar and gashes Miguel in the neck, in turn killing him. At this point, Mictlantecuhtli rises behind Eddie, who then hands over his heart, and Mictlantecuhtli eats it. Carla and Luis are like, you know what? Fuck all this. Let's get out of here. And they make a run for it. But Luis gets caught up and like stunned by Mictlantecuhtli. And when he comes to, he notices that Eddie and Miguel's bodies are now gone, presumably carried off to the underworld, and Carla is nowhere to be found either. And as he looks around, he eventually turns around, and boom, there's Carla, who then stabs him with her crowbar and removes Luis's heart. She then strips and presents that heart to Mictlantecuhtli as an offering. And she yells for him to rise, and as she does so, the building collapses even more, which in turn kills her. So, question being, was her mind influenced by Mictlantecuhtli, or was she secretly a priestess this whole time? I lean towards the latter because Carla was kind of the group's leader. Like, they seem to be following her direction most of the time. And so ending up in this crawl space in this chamber, which happened to be like ground zero for the rising of the king of the underworld, seems awfully convenient to me. I mean, I guess you can make the assumption that, you know, Mictlantecuhtli was guiding them without their knowledge, but whenever Eddie got possessed, like, he clearly like looked possessed. He looked differently, he sounded differently, but with Carla, she just seemed like regular ass Carla. If not, you know, I mean, she stopped crying after bashing old dude's brains in. That's really the only difference. But that would take some meticulous planning. Like, if you grew up in, you know, a family that worships Mictlantecuhtli or, you know, the other Aztec gods, and you're being prepped for his eventual return, and they're like, hey, you know, when he pops up, it's gonna be this big ass earthquake, so you gotta be trained to be like on the rescue crew and shit. So you gotta learn to save all these lives, learn how to navigate falling buildings and falling debris, somehow survive long enough, or hope you survive long enough through this earthquake to be able to actually make it to where your god is. And then once there, have someone still alive to cut their heart out and present it as an offering. Like, that's a lot of dominoes that had to fall perfectly in place. But hey, I guess that's the power of faith, right? But then the footage cuts to Gabriella on the broadcast, you know, recounting everything with the earthquake, and the segment ends. So let's go to the ratings. For story, I gave God of Death a 2. On the positive side, it exposed me to new cultural, you know, beliefs and whatnot, which is cool, but I just wanted more, dog. Like, it ended almost like kind of abruptly. Like, what happened after like Mictlantecuhtli like raised up? Is he taking over the surface? Is he bringing like an army of undead with him? Like, what happens from that point forward? I feel like there was a lot of potential here. I liked what I saw, just wanted to see more. That's it. For special effects, I went with a grade of 4. There were some highlights here, like the rebar sticking out of Javier's chest, Eddie's guts on his crowbar once he disemboweled himself, and the heart eating by Mictlantecuhtli. These visuals were all executed using practical effects, and I thought they were well done. The one note I'll add is I think things could have been elevated a little bit if we had seen something like, you know, like a glimpse of the underworld itself, or seen more of the impact of like the rubble in the ceiling falling on Lucia or somebody else. That little extra touch to add a little bit more visceral value. For situational fear, I went with a rating of 4. I mean, being in a massive earthquake as the building that you're in collapses and then stumbling upon the Aztec god of death is definitely a terrifying scenario. However, I have to account for the fact that one, Carla, Luis, Miguel, and Eddie were trained professionals who have spent considerable time preparing for situations like this. And I think people who take those jobs, their fear centers operate a little bit differently than the general population. And then on top of that, assuming that Carla was like a priestess who like believed or worshipped Mictlantecutli, I also think that the fear aspect with her being confronted with him would have been lower compared to regular people as well. So yeah. And finally, for likelihood of death, I also went with a 4. Times were tough, but they did survive the initial tremor. They did survive, or most of them survived, like the aftershocks. And so what really sealed their fate was continuing through the crawl space into the room and the billowing fog and following the screeching. So had they not gone down that path, there was still a chance for survival, albeit probably slim. So that brings the overall score for God of Death to a 3.5. Coming in at the number 2 spot for best segments in VHS 85, and I can understand if you or someone else wanted to put this as their number 1 because it is a strong segment. But we have Dream Kill. Dream Kill was directed by Scott Derrickson, who also co-wrote it along with C. Robert Cargill. Now, the two have teamed up as director and co-writer on multiple major projects such as 2012 Sinister, which some studies allege is scientifically the scariest movie ever made based on heart rate elevation. And they also worked together on 2016's Doctor Strange, and most importantly, especially as far as this segment is concerned, 2021's The Black Phone. I also want to point out that Scott Derrickson directed 2005's The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which would have been very good information to know a few weeks ago when I was competing in a horror trivia competition on the Cinematic Nightmares YouTube channel hosted by Mika G. And one of my questions was, who directed The Exorcism of Emily Rose? And I had no idea. Had I gotten that question right, I would have won, but instead I tied for like 3rd and I lost by half a point, which is some bullshit. I'm a very competitive person. This episode here, VHS 85, and this segment came like a week too late, which sucks, but it's all right. One of these days I'm going to get that dub. Anyway, Dream Kill takes place in the summer of 85 in Aurora, Colorado, and it comes out the gates hot. It starts with the POV of someone breaking into a home while audio plays of a woman named Karen making a 911 call about the break-in. And this video stylistically looks very similar to Sinister, which was my first thought watching it, and then come to find out, hey, the guy who made Sinister made this short too, so makes sense. But Karen is hiding under the bed and basically narrates her impending death, which is very chilling. And the killer finds her because hiding under her bed is probably the first place most people would look for someone. And he takes an electric carving knife and just goes to town. The segment then jumps to a cop named Wayne and a forensic videographer named Bobby investigating a murder scene. Bobby was played by actor James Ranson, who died by suicide this past December, so if you or anyone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide or self-harm, please call or text 988 ASAP to speak with someone. You are not alone. But Wayne comments that the house looks just like the one on a video he received at the station recently, and it turns out that's because they're identical. Karen is the murder victim at the scene they're investigating, but she's only been dead a few hours, despite the tape being received a week ago. The cops end up discovering that the tape was mailed from a public mailbox, so Wayne decides to set up a surveillance camera nearby in hopes that the person or persons who mailed it will return. But first, we get a view of the next video. So the killer breaks into someone's home, this time using a key. And once inside, he scuffles with the man who lives there, and the victim tries to beat the killer with the golf club, but the killer gains the upper hand and cuts the fingers off his right hand. And then dude just gets carved up. Real nasty work. But police received this tape 3 days before the murder. In reviewing the hidden camera footage by the public mailbox, they get a glimpse of a person of interest. So they set an officer out there to stake it out, and eventually the person of interest returns with a 3rd tape, and that is when he is apprehended. And this person ends up being an emo kid named Gunther. Gunther, that is that's an interesting name, especially for an emo kid. But hey, maybe that's why he's emo. I would also be feeling some kind of way if my parents decided to name me Gunther. And we don't have to look far to find his parent because his daddy is Bobby. So Bobby and Wayne are interrogating Gunther at the police station, and Gunther explains that he wanted a beta video camera, but his dad was cheap and went VHS. So Gunther would record movies and shit on the camera, and other images would begin to show up eventually. After this happened enough times, he began to recognize these images from his dreams. The camera would be recording his dreams, but Wayne is skeptical. That's when Bobby pulls him off to another room and tells him that Gunther is legit. He actually is a seer, and it runs in the family. Bobby's sister had this same gift, but it drove her crazy to the point that she died by suicide. And her daughter, Gunther's cousin Gwen, also has it. And that is when we realize that Dreamkill exists in the Black Phone universe. Gwen is the little girl who dreams of the Grabber's abductions, including that of her older brother Finney, the film's protagonist. But now that the cops have Gunther's 3rd tape in hand, they ask him what's on it, and he just tells them to watch it. So they do. And it shows the aftermath and the audio of a woman being dismembered by a power saw. The house number is visible in the video as the killer enters, so Wayne is able to deduce the street's location based on its proximity to the town's water tower. When they pull up to the house, Wayne confronts Bobby in the car. He lays out all this evidence about how the first victim and the 3rd future victim have an active lawsuit against Bobby, and the 2nd victim was their attorney. Bobby had lied to Wayne about voluntarily giving up his police badge to become a forensic videographer. In reality, he was forced to resign after the 2 women accused him of stalking and sexual assault. Well, Bobby, now feeling cornered, is like, you know what? Fuck this Wayne, and shoots him in the head, and R.I.P. Wayne. Look, if you're going to be confronting somebody who you think is a vicious killer, you've seen how he operates, you've seen the aftermath of his work, why would you do so in such close confines and also without backup? Like, why did you pull up to the house to show him this evidence? If you had it beforehand, confront him in the police station, bro, where you could just arrest him and put him in the jail cell and have other cops there with you in case shit goes awry. But for some reason, this motherfucker wanted to drive to the scene of a future crime and be like, hey, I know what you've been doing, buddy. What the fuck did you think was gonna happen here, Wayne? That is crazy. Not to mention the fact that as a detective on the police force, you had no idea that Bobby had these charges levied against him to begin with. Like, did you just recently transfer in? I guess that's a possibility. But even then, like, you would still think that he'd have like access to like the history or the background checks of his fellow co-workers, but whatever. Bobby exits the car as Wayne's brains slide down the window, and he goes into the house to kill the woman with the power saw. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Gunther had dozed off in the interrogation room, and he awakens from a dream, so he knows what's about to happen next. His dad comes into the room bloody as fuck, ready to kill him, as the dream plays out on the camera in the room at the same time. So Gunther's like, I'm not gonna die here. I know everything that's about to happen, which is a very confident and, dare I say, cocky thing to say, because the one thing about the future is that it can always change, right? So just because you had a dream about things going one way doesn't mean that Daddy Bobby can't call an audible and do some other shit. But hey, maybe I'm just paranoid because things work out perfectly for Gunther because the jig is up. Bobby gets confronted by other cops and he just starts going absolutely ham on these people, bro. Like, he drops like 5 cops. Dude looks like John Wick out here. It's actually kind of concerning that the police got dropped like this because they're supposed to be protecting the community and one fucking guy is just decimating them like nothing. But anyway, after Bobby's rampage concludes, he had forgotten about Gunther, so Gunther sneaks up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. End of segment. So let's go to the ratings. For story, I gave Dreamkill a 4. I think it was dope that it's set in the same universe as The Black Phone. I did not realize that the first time I watched it. I might have watched this before I watched The Black Phone, so none of that shit meant anything to me whatsoever. I was like, who the fuck is Gwen? Okay, cool. But now that I know, hindsight 2020, I was like, oh shit, like that is pretty cool. I think more filmmakers should think about that, like for future VHS or other anthology, films, like to kind of loop in your major works into these shorts. I think that's a pretty dope idea. So shout out Scott Derrickson for doing that, and C. Robert Cargill. But the flip side of that coin is that pulling from your other works too much can make this current story feel a little bit derivative. Like the Sinister vibes, it wasn't just like a nod to Sinister, it was basically like copy and paste Sinister with like that Super 8 kind of feel or whatever. And even like the music or the score sounded pretty familiar and similar to Sinister. But the story was still engaging, and I always like those kind of time displacement type of films, time travel as well. Like, the concept of time is such an interesting thing to me. It really doesn't make sense how time operates. No two people experience time the same way, and even within the same person, like the way that you experience time changes as you get older, or depending on your mood or whatever it may be, different life situations and scenarios. Like, time just ebbs and flows to a point where it's like, how do you even track this shit? And then also it's like, how are we even sure what time it currently is? Like, anytime you get a new phone, the time is automatically ready for you and shit. It's like, who determined what that starting point was? And how do we know that there hasn't been any slippage or acceleration since then? You're telling me that the sun, tracking the sun's positioning in the sky can tell you exactly what time it is at every minute, every second of every day for years and years and years? That seems suspect to me. I don't want to get too tinfoily here, but yeah, that doesn't really add up. For special effects, I gave Dreamkill a 5 out of 5. So some highlights include that when Karen was being murdered, not only was she carved up by this, electric carving knife, she also took a straight razor to the eyeball. And while this occurs, her eyeball like pops and oozes. And this is all done with practical effects. Absolutely insane. Whenever the lawyer got his fingers cut off, more practical effects. And then the power saw woman, she was just like a mangled mess of all kinds of body parts and blood and viscera. I already mentioned how Wayne's brains were splattered on the window and they were also like on his shoulder and shit. And then Bobby Wick, when he was going crazy in the police station, taking out all these cops, there were dudes missing limbs and all this splatter and all this shit. And it was practical effects. So definitely, easily 5 out of 5 on that front. For situational fear, I gave Dreamkill a 4. At the far right end of the spectrum, like super duper afraid, you gotta go with Bobby's victims, right? All of them, the 2 women and the attorney, I'm sure that they were absolutely shit your pants terrified, especially Karen essentially narrating her own death. That is insane. But that is counterbalanced to a certain extent by Gunther being cocky as fuck, thinking that, hey, I know everything that's gonna happen, so he wasn't really afraid. Wayne, I don't think, was really afraid. He thought he had the upper hand. It didn't seem like he expected Bobby to shoot him in the face, but yeah, that did happen. And then Bobby himself, I mean, just going straight Terminator mode on everybody, he didn't seem very afraid. He just seemed determined. So for, you know, we'll kind of lean towards the extreme end of the fear that the victims experience, but that is brought down a little bit by everybody else being relatively chill. And finally, for likelihood of death, I went with this score of a 3 because Karen was the only one who was really fucked in this entire situation. Like, she had no chance to survive unless she didn't hide under the bed, I guess, and jumped out the window or whatever it is, but that might be asking a lot for anybody who's in that kind of petrifying situation. But Wayne, I think, is the one that really could have tilted the odds for so many people, because if he didn't drive Bobby to the 3rd victim's house, she would have been okay, more than likely, because if he knew that Bobby was the killer and confronted him somewhere else, like in a jail cell, then that woman would have survived, all the cops would have survived, and Bobby himself may have survived unless he got the death penalty later. So Wayne is indirectly responsible for the deaths of like 7 people. Way to go, Wayne. And then the attorney, I mean, this dude, he had the drop on Bobby. He just couldn't finish the job with his golf club and he got disarmed and then disfingered. So if you could have squabbled a little bit better there, buddy, you also could have survived. So most people had a chance here, other than Karen. But averaging all those scores together brings Dreamkill up to an overall score of 4.0. Very respectable. And last but not least, coming in at the #1 spot for best segment in VHS 85 is actually 2 segments. We have a very special case here where 2 different segments told the same story but from 2 different points of view. So at #1 we have No Wake / Ambrosia. These segments were written and directed by Mike P. Nelson, whose filmography also includes the 2021 reboot of Wrong Turn, as well as 2025 Silent Night, Deadly Night remake. So let's break down No Wake first. The story centers on a group of 7 friends, Rob, Anna, Jared, Drew, Robin, Kevin, and Kelly, who hop in an RV and take a trip to a lake. Once they arrive, there are signs around there that very clearly say, no swimming, but YOLO. 5 of them decide to go out on a boat for some wakeboarding and general shenanigans, while 2 of them, Jared and Anna, stay behind on shore. After a little while, the 5 on the boat take a peek at shore and notice that Jared and Anna are gone. They have slipped away into their tent for a little hanky-panky. But the group also notices there's an unknown truck parked behind their RV, which is a little strange. But the group continues wakeboarding, and Rob is trying to teach Robin how to wakeboard. How cute. Their names are so similar. They have a little banter going on. Things are a little bit flirty. And you start to root for them because Rob seems like one of those dudes who doesn't get a lot of action. One of those underdogs. So it's like, come on, Rob, go ahead and close this deal, my boy. And so Robin gets up on the wakeboard and she's doing it and everyone's clapping for her and it's great. Suddenly she falls over and is laying motionless in the water. So now everyone's like, what the fuck just happened? So they pull her back onto the boat and she appears to be dead. And before they have time to even register what's happening, gunshots. Gunshot. Wow, that is a new one. Oh gosh. Okay, gunshots begin to ring out and Kelly gets her face blown off. Her jaw is literally like hanging by a thread on her face. She takes a bullet through the back of the head and everyone's like, yo, what the fuck? Someone is sniping from somewhere on the land and just starts picking them off one by one. So Kevin takes a bullet to the head. He's done. Rob and Drew are the last two standing, so they're trying to hide out. They take some shots. One of them like loses his fingers, they get blown off. Another one takes a shot to the leg, so he can't really move around. And eventually bullets start to penetrate the boat and Rob gets his brains blown out and Drew takes a shot to the chest and everyone is dead. Pretty awkward. But then things start to get a little bit wacky because Rob, Drew, Robin, and Kelly all suddenly resurrect. And they're like, yo, what is happening right now? Mind you, Kelly's face is still hella fucked up. So Robin is like sitting next to her holding her jaw up and it is insane. But they take the boat back to shore and they see the number 7 has been drawn in Roman numerals on their RV in what appears to be blood. So now they're like, okay, what happened to Jared and Anna? Are they okay? Drew goes over to the tent, takes a peek in there, and whatever he sees apparently is not a very pleasant sight because he tells Rob, who is Anna's brother, don't go in there, bro. You do not want to see what's in there. But Rob goes in anyway and sees his sister and her boyfriend dead. They have been killed off screen and he's like, yo, that sucks. And he's sad and freaking out because nobody understands what's going on. So at this point, the group is trying to assess the situation. Kevin is still dead on the boat. So because of that, they deduce that anyone who went into the water was able to be revived and anyone who did not is permanently dead. So yeah, this lake has some kind of magical immortality granting properties. Pretty wild shit. And while they're huddled up considering what to do next, someone realizes that, hey, they captured that truck, which is no longer there, on camera, so maybe they also captured its license plate in the footage. And they want some revenge. And at this point, the segment ends. And let me tell you, bro, this was the very first segment in the film. And when it ended, I was so mad. I was like, what the fuck, bro? Like, this shit was very interesting. And it just cuts off so abruptly right there with no resolution. Like, I had my spreadsheet by me and I wrote 1 down in the story. Like, man, fuck this shit. Like, I was pissed. But patience is a virtue, which brings us to Ambrosia. This segment opens with some sort of party being thrown for a teenage girl named Ruth. It's her family celebrating her for something. And so she's going around just, filming everyone, getting kind of excerpts from them, anecdotes and all that shit, well wishes, blah, blah, blah. And she comes to her cousin James and the two of them start going around and filming together. Eventually they go outside and Ruth's little cousin runs up on her with a little squirt gun and shoots her with it. And she asks where he got it from. And he says, quote, the lady in the RV. And he said that shit like creepily as hell. And so Ruth was like, yo, the fuck? And when the kid said this, the camera kind of pans and we see the RV driving off. We see its tail end and it looks a little bit familiar. The camera also pans to the driveway where we see a truck sitting there that also looks pretty familiar. So at this point, the audience is probably able to connect the dots that Ambrosia is a continuation of the No Wake story, but we don't really know exactly what's happening in this family home. Ruth and James end up heading inside with James manning the camera, and it's time to get to the actual celebration part. So this party is for Ruth stepping into some sort of family tradition that apparently dates back many, many years. And the family is the Wrigley family. And Ruth starts to give a speech, and in this speech she says, "To the 7," and folks raise their hands and show Roman numeral 7 tats on all their wrists. It's the same one, the same design that was on the RV in No Wake. Ruth continues with her speech, and she praises her grandpa's prowess with a sickle and her aunt's classic arsenic brownies. Turns out this ritual is to kill 7 people, and it was Ruth's turn. So she pops in a videotape, and it's of her finding the RV friends, following them, and eventually killing them and sniping them. So she uses her dad's hunting rifle to kill Anna and Jared in the tent first, which, bro, talk about a cock block. Like, that is so fucking rude, bro. Like, they have no other opportunity to be alone on this trip, more than likely, and here you are just rolling up, killing them at random because your mommy and daddy said so. Alright, bet. And as the tape continues with Ruth sniping the 5 on the boat, police show up outside the house and interrupt this watch party. And the family is like, okay, this is what we prepared for. We knew this day would come at some point, and they're ready to make their last stand. They are absolutely strapped, bro. You know that scene in The Matrix when Neo and Trinity are getting ready to go rescue Morpheus and got the iconic line, "Guns, lots of guns." That's what I thought of immediately when these people were loading up. Like, that's the extent to which they were strapped. But the assumption is that the RV friends tipped off the police here, which we can get into how they found the house to begin with a little bit later. But anyway, Ruth's mom gives her a final piece of advice. She says to fight and then take her own life. Do not let the police take her alive and disgrace the family name. So no pressure. You just gotta kill a bunch of people and then also kill yourself. Thanks, Mom. But all the Wrigleys start blasting, bro, and they're all going out in a blaze of glory. And so Ruth and James end up in a bedroom, and they're getting ready for the cops to breach the house and eventually breach the room. And Ruth tries to pass James a piece, and he's like, man, nah, I don't really think I got it in me right now, bro. Like, to be honest, y'all got it. James understandably doesn't want to die at like 19, but Ruth keeps trying to pass him a pistol and telling him to nut up, and he's like, no, he refused. And so she's like, all right, fine, you want to be like that? Die then. And she shoots and kills him. So the camera falls to the ground, and we see Ruth kind of post up against the bed, like ready for the cops to bust in the room. And they do, and she has her last stand, pops off a few rounds, but then she gets absolutely lit up and dies. Then as the police are assessing the fallout, commenting on the fact that Ruth can't be any older than like 15 or 16, the medical examiner is, checking her out. And much to her surprise, as well as Ruth's, Ruth resurrects, and she grabs her pistol and pops off at the medical examiner. R.I.P. Wrong place, wrong time. That sucks. But she's hella confused, and the cops are shook, so they shoot at her again, so she dies again. But then she resurrects yet again, and now everyone is like, bro, what the fuck is going on? And so eventually they just apprehend her instead of trying to shoot her again, and she gets hauled off to presumably spend the rest of her life behind bars or whatever. But ultimately she did the one thing that her mother asked her not to do, which was disgrace the family name. Sucks to suck. That's what you get for cock blocking not only Jared and Anna, but also Rob and Robin had a budding little romance going, and you wanted to snipe them too. So fuck you, Ruth. Enjoy prison for literally forever. Like, bro, can you imagine having to live in prison for eternity? That would be insane, but she deserves it, okay? hating on my people. Look, I love love, all right? My logo is a heart for a reason, whether that's love of horror movies or romantic love. I mean, I've been married for almost 10 years. I like to see people find their person. And so to see someone else come in between that for some selfish ass reasons, I always root against that person. So yeah, kick rocks, Ruth. But also, I guess if we're being real here, Ruth wouldn't spend eternity in prison. The government would eventually break her out and have her do some black ops shit. You know, send her to do the impossible task because she has unlimited opportunities to complete it. Unless, I guess, her like limbs get blown off or something in the process. If she goes like, you know, to a war zone type shit. And then at that point, I guess that would be pretty awkward, just having to lay there, you know, in the battlefield or in the streets as a fucking human potato. But again, Ruth, I would not shed a tear if that happened to you. But anyway, after Ruth gets hauled off, the footage then cuts to Robin, and she's at the lake filling up a squirt gun with water from that lake. And this, of course, is the same squirt gun that she gave Ruth's little cousin, hence being the source of her unwanted and unexpected immortality. End of segment. So let's go to the ratings. For story, I gave No Wake and Ambrosia a 5 out of 5. I loved it. Of course, it started off poorly, right? I was mad, you know, but man, it really came through at the end there. Like, it was original, it was engaging, I didn't know where things were going. I thought it was dope. For a lot of these segments, I'm just trying to watch them for like face value, not really trying to dive too deeply into any kind of like messages or commentary that may come from it. But sometimes the commentary just like comes through whether I want it to or not, or whether I'm looking for it or not. And this was an example of that. The Wrigley family presents as pretty wealthy, and the RV gang presents as significantly less wealthy. So having these rich people use people who aren't as well off as them as kind of pawns to further their own wealth, I think sums up a lot of society in general. My assumption is that these 7 sacrifices are made in exchange for that wealth and power and status, etc. So it's been this continuation dating back generations, it seems. You know, they got that old ass money. So I'm assuming that the 7, whomever they may be, are some kind of like demons or, you know, otherworldly supernatural entities that are bestowing this power in exchange for these blood sacrifices. And I think the 7 are like a stand-in for like big business or these big conglomerates, these corporations that are building or amassing this huge amount of wealth that is hoarded by people at the very, very top, but it's fundamentally built on the backs and the labor and the hard work of people beneath them who are not seeing nearly as much wealth as these people at the top. And these people would literally rather die than give up their power. Another takeaway I had was the family aspect of things, how this kid, Ruth, even though fuck her, she's still like 15, 16 years old. She's been indoctrinated from birth, most likely, that this is how things are. Like, she never was given an opportunity to think for herself and maybe ask questions about, hey, why are we sacrificing 7 people again? Can you remind me why we are all murderous pieces of shit? And so a lot of these negative traits in society, you know, whether it's racism, misogyny, xenophobia, whatever it is, like, these traits are not inherently present in anybody. They are learned. They are passed down from parents to their children. And these things are perpetuated because these kids who internalize these things don't have the opportunity or don't have the willpower to try to be like, you know what? Nah, I'm actually not rocking with that. And so these things aren't ever going to go away because there's always going to be someone who is going to teach these things, and there's always going to be someone who is going to listen because their mommy and daddy is saying this to them. And they'll probably continue to poorly mask these things under the guise of politics and religion, but I digress. For special effects, I gave these segments a 4.5. Everything was done with practical effects, looked great. You know, Kelly got shot in the face, her jaw was hanging on by a thread, looked insane. She's sitting there holding it up, has Robin helping her hold it up, and looks like a ventriloquist dummy. It's crazy. Drew, after taking a shot to the chest, I think he took a shot to the gut too, and so his intestines are kind of like spilling out a little bit. He's trying to hold that shit in. Rob has chunks of his brain stuck in his hair after getting his shit blown out. And all the gunfire with the big shootout at the end and all that shit, just really practically well done. For situational fear, I gave these segments a rating of a 4. Being out on the boat would have been the most terrifying aspect for me. That part by itself is a total 5. Like, not only are you pinned down by sniper fire, like you have no idea where the shots are coming from. You're seeing your friends around you die. You've taken some hits too. People are missing fingers and shit. Like, that is definitely terrifying. My pants would have been shat. Not only that, I personally have a fear of like murky water. I do not fuck with lakes at all. If I can't see through the surface all the way to the bottom, that shit freaks me out because I have no idea what's down there, whether it's like a snapping turtle or fucking kraken. I don't know. Like deep ocean, bro, deep ocean is absolutely petrifying for me. Like, who knows what's down there? We haven't even explored very much of the oceanic depths. You know what I mean? A very small percentage, and we've seen some weird shit just in that small percentage. So who knows what's down there? Fucking kaijus and shit? Hell no. Terrifying. But I do have to take the Wrigley family's fear level into consideration as well, and they didn't seem very afraid at all. Like, they were ready to go. This is what they expected would happen at some point, and they went out the way they wanted to go out. So they were chilling. The RV folks were not chilling, so I'm gonna lean towards them, but can't go with the full 5 because of the Wrigley family, so we'll go with that 4. And finally, for likelihood of death, I gave these segments a 5 out of 5. I mean, everybody died. Like, literally everybody died, and I don't think there was any way to avoid it. I mean, the people on the boat or at the lake, they just got sniped. They couldn't run anywhere. The people on the boat were trapped. The people in the tent, they were vulnerable. They couldn't see outside of the tent, so they were in a confined space. They had no shot. And then the Wrigley family, they had no intentions of being taken alive, so their deaths were pretty much guaranteed as well. So average all these ratings together, and we get a score for No Wake and Ambrosia of a 4.63. So to recap all the ratings for the segments in VHS 85, at number 5, we had TKNOGD with a 2.75, then we had Total Copy with a 3.0, next came God of Death with a 3.5, followed by Dream Kill with a 4.0, and then No Wake and Ambrosia with that 4.63. And a 4.63 is a pretty high score, so I think our top 5 overall just got shaken up. So sorry, Ozzy's Dungeon, you are now out of there. So coming in at number 5, we have Amateur Night from VHS with a score of a 4.13. Number 4, The Sick Thing That Happened to Emily When She Was Younger, also from VHS with a score of 4.25. Sliding into that number 3 spot, we now have No Wake and Ambrosia from VHS 85 with a score of 4.63, and our top 2 remain unchanged, with Safe Haven from VHS 2 coming in with a 4.75, and at number 1, The Subject from VHS 94 with a score of 4.88. But that's all for me. I'm out of here. I'll see you in 2 weeks for VHS Beyond, which was my most liked film in this franchise prior to starting this rewatch, so we'll see if it still holds up. But in the meantime, remember, always keep it spooky.